welcome all you blasphemous creations. I'm the Words of Blasphemy, CJ Middle, and today I read World Without God by Convulse. If you're a big fan of death metal, then you probably already know about this album and band. One of my subscribers, Kesha, said that this band is like the cousin to Entombed. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, this band's from Finland, Entombed's from Sweden, obviously. We have Left Hand Path, World Without God. Yeah, I could see the cousin relationship there. Released all the way back in 1991, this death metal album doesn't bring anything new to death metal, but it still kicks ass in its own right. Being a Finnish death metal album, it of course has some atmosphere and some doomy sections.
Tonight at 11.
But that isn't really new either. In fact, this whole album could be considered a copycat of early death metal. Now, how come so many people rave about it then if it's only really just a copycat? Well, let's look into it a little more. Now, by 1991, death metal has been around now for about 7 years. You already have bands like Morbid Angel, Death, Possessed, Deicide, and others have already released massive debut albums and stuff like that. I mean, just the year prior to this, Entombed unleashed their Swedish death metal album, Left Hand Path, which would, of course, create the Swedish death metal region, or sound, or whatever you want to call it. So at this point, there's already a lot of death metal, and instead of pushing death metal into new territory or expanding upon it, Convulse basically just said, fuck it, we're just gonna make what everyone else is making, because why not? So, I mean, this could also be considered a cookie cutter death metal album, which you may have heard before. Now, before you start blasting down on your keyboard and breathing really heavy, just hear me out here. Cookie cutter albums aren't always bad, especially in this case. I mean, if you look at bands nowadays, they all want to sound like the old school bands and albums and stuff like that, but Convulse actually does sound like they came out of the early death metal scene. This album just drips with grittiness and absolute filth, similar to the early American death metal scene. The growls are these nasty gutturals, the guitar tone is grimy, the bass is audible, the riffs are somewhat basic, and the drumming is on point. It's everything you really want from a death metal album. I mean, sure, it doesn't contain anything mind-blowing, but it doesn't have to. I mean, this album is cookie cutter, done right in my opinion. It sounds like death metal, it is death metal, and it's good death metal. There's really nothing to complain about on here. Sure, it's not the most progressive thing or the most, anything like that, but if you're just looking for a really just gritty old school death metal album, well then Convulse has got you. If you enjoy old school gritty grimy death metal, then I highly suggest seeking out this album. It is quite good, and with all that in mind, I have to say that this is a very good / great album. Like I've mentioned many times now, it may be cookie cutter, but it's still really solid death metal on here. And if you aren't familiar with the Finnish death metal scene, well, the Finnish death metal scene is basically, it's death metal, obviously, but they also like to include a lot of dark atmosphere and a lot of doomier sections. Not quite death doom, but just doom sections, if that makes sense. Like doom influenced, if you will. So if you want death metal with some atmosphere and doom sections, I highly suggest looking into the Finnish death metal scene, because that's what you're gonna get there. Anyways, that's all I got for today. Thank you everyone for liking and subscribing. Make sure you tell a friend to do all that same stuff, and I will see you at the next review.